You carry it everywhere. You reach for it first thing in the morning, check it last thing before sleep, and feel its absence like a missing limb when you forget it at home. The device in your pocket wasn't built to surveil you, but it has become the most effective intelligence-gathering instrument ever created. Not through force or deception, but through voluntary participation. Every tap, every swipe, every moment it spends in your presence generates data that flows silently into systems designed to observe, categorize, and predict. The smartphone is not merely a tool you use. It is a witness to your life, recording patterns you don't consciously reveal and creating portraits of who you are with a precision no human agent could ever achieve. There was a time when surveillance required effort. Agents followed targets through city streets. Cameras needed to be positioned and monitored. Phone lines had to be physically tapped. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies deployed vast resources to track individuals. But even the most sophisticated operations were limited by geography, manpower, and the fundamental challenge of human observation. Surveillance was active, deliberate, and detectable if you knew what to look for. But something fundamental has changed in the architecture of modern life. The shift happened gradually, almost imperceptibly, as digital technology wove itself into the fabric of daily existence. Today's surveillance doesn't announce itself with unmarked vans or suspicious figures lingering across the street. It exists in the background of normalcy, embedded in the devices people trust, operating continuously without requiring anyone to watch. Modern surveillance is not about listening to your conversations, though the capability exists. It's about something far more revealing, the metadata of existence. When you move through the world with your phone, it knows where you go, how long you stay, and how often you return. It knows the route you take to work, the gym you visit on Wednesdays, the cafe where you linger on Sunday mornings. Location data creates maps of behavior that reveal routines, relationships, and patterns of life with startling clarity. Two phones that repeatedly appear in the same location at the same time suggest a connection. A phone that deviates from its usual pattern signals a change worth noting. Movement alone tells stories that words never need to confirm. But location is only the beginning. The device in your hand contains an array of sensors that register orientation, acceleration, ambient light, proximity to other devices. These sensors feed into algorithms that interpret behavior in ways most people never consider. The timing of your screen activations, the rhythm of your typing, the duration of your sessions, all of this contributes to a behavioral signature as unique as a fingerprint. Communication patterns reveal social networks even without accessing message content. Who you contact, when you contact them, how frequently, and for how long. These metadata points construct relationship maps that intelligence agencies once spent years trying to assemble. Now they form automatically, updated in real time, requiring no human analysis to generate insights. The notifications you receive, the apps you open, the searches you perform. Each action contributes to a profile that predicts future behavior with unsettling accuracy. Algorithms learn when you wake up, when you're most likely to make purchases, when your attention wavers. They detect mood shifts from usage patterns, identify vulnerabilities from browsing history, and anticipate needs before you articulate them. This is surveillance that doesn't observe you. It understands you. It sees the patterns you don't recognize in yourself, the routines you follow unconsciously, the preferences you haven't admitted, and because the data accumulates silently, without interruption, without any indication that observation is occurring. Most people never consider the depth of visibility they've accepted. The old model of espionage required intent. Someone had to decide you were worth watching, allocate resources, build a case for why surveillance was justified. Modern systems require no such justification because they monitor everyone equally. Surveillance is no longer selective, it's ambient. The infrastructure that makes your phone useful, the networks it connects to, the services it accesses, the platforms that process your data. All of these generate records by design. The act of participation creates the trail. You don't have to be suspected of anything. You simply have to exist in a world where digital interaction leaves traces. Consider the nature of that existence for a moment. The screen glowing in a dark room, casting light on a face absorbed in scrolling. The silent ping of a notification. The automatic reach to check what arrived. The location dot that moves across a map, tracking a journey the traveler has already forgotten. The data flowing through cables and wireless signals, invisible and audible, carrying fragments of lives converted into transmissible form. Day after day, the same patterns repeat, the same routes traveled, the same apps open in the same sequence, the same behavioral rhythms maintained with such consistency that deviation itself becomes noteworthy. This is the architecture of modern surveillance, not occasional observation, but continuous recording woven into the infrastructure of daily life. What makes this form of monitoring so effective is its passivity. No one interrogates you. No one follows you down the street. No one rummages through your belongings looking for evidence. The surveillance simply occurs as a byproduct of convenience. The same features that make your phone useful, navigation, communication, connectivity, are the mechanisms through which observation happens. You trade visibility for utility, often without recognizing the transaction. And because the systems that collect this data operate beyond individual perception, because you can't see the data flowing or feel its accumulation, the psychological weight of being watched never settles in. You carry the surveillance device willingly, even protectively, because it feels like yours. The disturbing truth is that surveillance today doesn't require the apparatus of oppression to function. It doesn't need secret police or government overreach. It only needs consistency. It needs people to maintain the habits that make their lives predictable, to carry the devices that make those habits visible, and to never quite grasp how completely the portrait has been painted. The device you trust most, the one you reach for without thinking, already knows where you've been, who matters to you, what occupies your attention, and what you're likely to do next. It knows you in ways that no human observer, no matter how dedicated, could ever achieve. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it has known you this way for so long that you've forgotten what privacy used to feel like. But understanding that you are observed is only the beginning. The more important question, the one that reveals the true architecture of modern surveillance, is this: who benefits from knowing? The answer is not a single shadowy figure watching from a control room. There are no individuals hunched over monitors, taking notes on your movements. Modern surveillance is institutional, systematic, and distributed across entities that rarely acknowledge their role in the apparatus. Governments seek security and control. Corporations pursue profit and prediction. Algorithms optimize for engagement and efficiency. Each operates with its own logic, its own incentives. Yet together they form an ecosystem where observation has become the foundation of power. And the most efficient surveillance systems are those that people participate in willingly, without recognizing the transaction taking place. Consider how this participation unfolds. Every app you install, every service you use, every platform you join begins with a moment of consent that isn't really consent at all. The terms of service appear on your screen. Thousands of words of legal language outlining what will be collected, how it will be used, who it might be shared with. You scroll past it without reading because reading would take hours, because the alternative is not using the service at all, and because everyone else has already agreed. The checkbox is clicked, the button is pressed, access is granted. In that instant, you've authorized surveillance, but the decision feels less like a choice and more like a formality. A barrier between you and the functionality you want. This is how modern systems acquire permission, not through informed decision-making, but through the erosion of meaningful alternatives. Consent becomes a legal fiction, a record that protects institutions rather than individuals. The data collected through these agreements flows into systems that exist far beyond individual perception. Somewhere, in buildings you will never see, servers process the accumulated fragments of millions of lives. Your location history merges with browsing patterns, purchase records, social connections. and communication metadata. Individually, these data points seem innocuous. Collectively, they form a portrait of behavior that can be analyzed, categorized, and predicted with remarkable accuracy. Corporations use this information to anticipate what you'll want before you realize you want it, to shape the advertisements you see, to determine the prices you're offered, to decide which opportunities appear in your feed. The goal is not understanding for its own sake, it's influence. When companies can predict behavior, they can guide it. When they know your vulnerabilities, they can exploit them. The line between serving customer needs and manufacturing those needs becomes increasingly difficult to discern. Governments, operating under different incentives, integrate similar data into frameworks of security and control. The justification is protection, identifying threats, preventing crime, maintaining order. The methodology is pattern recognition on a massive scale. Algorithms scan communications for keywords, track movements for anomalies, cross-reference behaviors against models of suspicion. The system doesn't need to understand context or intention. It only needs to flag deviations from expected norms. Innocent people become subjects of interest not because they've done anything wrong, but because their data patterns align with profiles deemed worthy of attention. This is surveillance that operates through categorization, where being placed in the wrong bucket can trigger consequences you never anticipated and may never fully understand. What makes this form of observation so pervasive is that it doesn't require conspiracy or malice. The infrastructure builds itself through ordinary market forces and institutional logic. Companies collect data because data is valuable, because competitors collect data, because investors demand growth, and growth requires deeper understanding of user behavior. Governments expand surveillance capabilities because technology makes it possible, because security agencies argue it's necessary, because public fear creates political pressure to demonstrate vigilance. Each actor pursues rational self-interest within their own domain, and the cumulative effect is a surveillance apparatus that operates across society, without anyone explicitly designing it that way. Control emerges not from a master plan, but from the convergence of efficiency, convenience, and the relentless pursuit of information advantage. The insidious brilliance of this system is how thoroughly it conceals itself behind utility. Your phone tracks your location to provide navigation. It monitors your activity to improve health insights. It records your communications to enable search functionality. Every surveillance capability arrives wrapped in a feature. Every data collection justified by a service. You aren't being watched. You're being helped. The technology isn't intrusive. It's personalized. The algorithms aren't controlling you. They're learning your preferences. This framing obscures the fundamental reality that observation is occurring constantly, that records are being kept indefinitely, and that the patterns being extracted will be used in ways you cannot predict or control. The choice you're offered is not whether to participate in surveillance, but whether to participate in modern life. For most people, in most contexts, that's not really a choice at all. And so the habits continue. The same apps opened in the same sequence, the same routes traveled, the same searches conducted, the same content consumed. Day after day, the patterns repeat with such consistency that they become predictive. Algorithms learn when you're vulnerable to certain messages, when you're likely to make impulsive decisions, when your attention can be captured and held. Your behavior becomes a model that can be simulated, tested, and optimized against. You are no longer just a person using technology. You are a data set being analyzed, a pattern being refined, a profile being monetized. The surveillance doesn't watch you specifically because it doesn't need to. It watches the patterns, and you are the pattern. This is perhaps the most troubling aspect of modern surveillance. Its focus on the statistical, rather than the individual. Systems don't need to know your name to know your behavior. They don't need to understand your thoughts to predict your actions. They simply need enough data points to place you within established behavioral clusters, to recognize that people who match your profile tend to respond in predictable ways to specific stimuli. You become legible through correlation, knowable through comparison. controllable through categorization. And unlike cameras that can be avoided or agents that can be evaded, patterns are nearly impossible to escape. Changing your behavior only creates a new pattern. Abandoning one device for another merely shifts which systems observe you. The architecture of surveillance is now embedded so deeply in digital infrastructure that extraction requires abandoning the infrastructure itself. The sobering reality is that once patterns exist, once the data has been collected and the profiles have been built, erasure becomes functionally impossible. Deletion doesn't mean disappearance. Records persist in backups and shared databases, and systems you never directly interacted with but which received your information through secondary channels. The portrait assembled from years of observation doesn't vanish because you stop using a particular service. It remains, incomplete perhaps, but still revealing, still predictive, still valuable to those who hold it. You cannot unwrite the history your data has already created. You cannot reclaim the visibility you've already granted. The surveillance you participated in, often without realizing it, has generated consequences that will extend far beyond your awareness, shaping opportunities and constraints in ways that remain largely invisible until the moment they become unavoidable. The consequences of living under constant observation extend beyond the data itself. They reshape behavior in ways that are subtle but profound. When people know they are being watched, even unconsciously, they adjust. They moderate their expressions, reconsider their searches, hesitate before sharing thoughts that might be misinterpreted or flagged by automated systems. This is the chilling effect of surveillance, not that it punishes directly, but that it creates an environment where self-censorship becomes reflexive. You start to wonder whether certain topics are safe to research, whether certain opinions are worth expressing, whether certain associations might create the wrong impression in some unseen database. The freedom to explore ideas, to make mistakes, to change your mind without permanent record, these dimensions of autonomy erode gradually, so slowly that many people never notice the transformation until they realize they've been moderating themselves for years. This behavioral modification occurs without force, without explicit threats. The surveillance simply exists, ambient and continuous, and its presence is enough to alter the calculus of choice. You don't need to be told what's acceptable. The systems train you through subtle feedback loops. Certain content appears more readily in your searches, certain recommendations dominate your feed, certain paths through digital space feel frictionless while others require extra steps, extra verification, extra scrutiny. The architecture guides behavior through design, shaping what feels natural and what feels cumbersome. Over time, the boundaries internalize. You stop testing the limits because you've learned where they are, or more accurately, you've learned that limits exist even if their precise location remains unclear. This is control without coercion, conformity without command. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of modern surveillance is how completely it has been normalized. A generation ago, the idea that corporations and governments would track every movement, monitor every communication, and analyze every behavioral pattern would have seemed dystopian, intolerable. Today, it's simply how things work. People accept it not because they approve, but because resistance feels futile and the conveniences offered in exchange seem indispensable. The surveillance becomes invisible not because it's hidden, but because it's constant. You stop noticing the water when you're always swimming in it. The phone on your nightstand, silent in the dark, connected to networks that never sleep, processing your location even when you're not using it. This device has become so ordinary that its presence no longer registers as remarkable. The infrastructure of observation has woven itself so thoroughly into daily life that imagining existence without it requires more effort than accepting it. There's a bitter irony in how the tools of surveillance have evolved. Intelligence agencies once deployed human operatives at enormous expense and risked to gather fragments of information about targets. Spies needed covers, handlers, extraction plans. The work was dangerous, resource-intensive, and limited in scope. Today, the information collects itself. People document their own lives, tag their own locations, declare their own interests and affiliations. They carry tracking devices willingly, update their profiles regularly, and maintain digital presences that reveal far more than any interrogation could extract. The spy agencies still exist, but their methods have transformed fundamentally. They don't need to infiltrate your life. They simply need access to the systems you've already integrated into it. The surveillance requires no human courage, no operational brilliance, no tactical ingenuity. It only requires infrastructure, access, and the passive cooperation of billions of people who've never been asked whether they consent to living in a surveillance state. The data archives grow endlessly, accumulating in facilities that span continents, consuming energy on scales that rival small nations. Every day adds to the record. Every interaction generates more signal. The portrait becomes more detailed, the predictions more accurate, the profile more complete. And because the systems operate automatically, because analysis happens algorithmically, the surveillance scales in ways that human observation never could. 1,000 analysts could not watch 1,000 people as effectively as algorithms watch millions. The panopticon once required guards and towers. Now it requires only sensors and servers. The watch vastly outnumber the watchers, yet the asymmetry of visibility has never been greater. What becomes of freedom in such a system? Not the abstract concept debated in philosophy, but the lived experience of moving through the world without accumulated records defining your possibilities before you arrive. Freedom requires the capacity for reinvention, for privacy, for choices that aren't predetermined by past patterns. It requires the ability to be unknown, to be misunderstood, to be judged on present actions rather than algorithmic predictions derived from historical data. These freedoms diminish in proportion to the comprehensiveness of surveillance. You remain legally free, technically autonomous, but your options narrow as systems learn to anticipate and guide your behavior. The cage is built from convenience and efficiency, constructed so gradually that many people never notice they were confined, until they try to move in directions the architecture doesn't accommodate. This is the endpoint of the trajectory that began with a simple decision to carry a smartphone. The device promised connection, capability, and convenience. It delivered, but the price was visibility, not just to the people you chose to communicate with, but to systems you never agreed to participate in, operated by entities whose interests don't align with yours. The phone in your pocket has become the most effective surveillance tool ever created, not because it was designed with that purpose, but because it serves the purpose perfectly while pretending to serve you. Every feature that makes it useful simultaneously makes you observable. Every capability that enhances your life generates data that enhances someone else's power. The question you must now confront is not whether surveillance exists, that much is undeniable. The question is what you choose to do with that awareness. Will you modify your behavior? Reconsider your relationship with technology? Examine the trade-offs you've accepted without scrutiny? Or will you continue as before, habits unchanged, devices ever-present, patterns repeating day after day? Awareness without action changes nothing. The systems will continue operating regardless of whether you acknowledge them. But understanding the architecture of modern surveillance at least provides the foundation for meaningful choice, for decisions made with eyes open rather than attention elsewhere. If this investigation has shifted your perspective, if these revelations have made you reconsider what you thought you knew about privacy and observation in the digital age, then help this message reach others who need to hear it. Like this video to signal that this content matters. Subscribe to the channel to ensure you don't miss future investigations that expose the hidden systems shaping modern life. Comment below with your thoughts. Does modern surveillance make society safer, or does it simply make us more observable? Does constant monitoring prevent threats, or does it create new forms of control that we're only beginning to understand? Your voice in the conversation matters, because these questions will define the world we inhabit for decades to come. In the end, the most effective spy does not hide in shadows, does not operate from foreign embassies, does not require dead drops or coded messages. The most effective spy lives in your pocket, sleeps on your nightstand, and knows you better than anyone you've ever met. You trusted it with your life, and it has been faithfully recording every detail, building a portrait of who you are that will outlast your memory of creating it. The device you reach for without thinking has become the witness you never questioned. And in the modern world, the witness never stops watching.